Can't lose one of our new Isla Vista elected officials to a murder charge.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:06 p.m. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded. May I have a roll call?
Director Aguilar,
Here.
Topliff,
Here.
Brandt,
Here.
Freeman,
Here.
Daschler is absent, Schultz,
Here.
and Director Craig will come late.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Anasquayo, the land that Isla Vista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. At this point, I'd like to move on to the consent agenda. Do any directors want to make a motion or consider items from the consent agenda?
I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda with the request that Dixon provides us with a more detailed invoice.
I'll keep asking for that.
Do I have a second with that motion? All right, so the motion by Topliff and the second by Schultz. Is there any public comment on this motion? See no public comment on this motion. All directors who are in favor of this, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. And this motion passes 5-0-0-2. This time, we'll move on to the public comment period. Any member of the public may speak on matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Board of Directors that are not on the agenda. The board will not take action on any item not on the agenda except as provided by law. Is there any public comment at this time? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Henry Soria. I'm getting to the habit of giving my name on them before I speak. So at the last IVCSD meeting, I believe it was Director Aguilar that said the following comment, something similar to it, and that is, it's a shame that it takes a tragedy to bring people together. And no truer words could be spoken, or no better observation can be made, but one has to wonder why those words ring true. Speaking before public and elected officials or appointed officials, while easy for some, can be difficult for others. But it's the most effective way to keep everyone abreast of community trends and behaviors. With that said, I think that one of the reasons we don't get too much community involvement until a tragedy happens is the fear of ridicule some have with regards to what they have to say and the topics of which to speak about. Last session of the IVCSD saw many points of view from a segment of the Isla Vista community that is seldom heard from. Older residents from the West End, they had a lot to say, and agree with them or not, they are an important component of our community. We have to wonder why this outpouring commentary from this segment of our community doesn't happen more often. But some of the reasons are pretty evident. This segment feels that their words are ignored, dismissed, or even ridiculed or shamed as a function of their social class here in our little unincorporated enclave of Santa Barbara County. Well, I know for a fact that is not the case with the CSD board of directors or staff. I can see that occurring with certain elements of our community. That would be the larger population, which consists of the student segment, the constituents that are always championed for. I experienced that kind of sentiment on occasion when I was told by certain members of our community that I didn't belong in Isla Vista, I'm too old, and that this is their town, and we have no place here. This kind of mentality amounts to one word that describes a known governmental system of a bygone era, and that word is apartheid. Yes, it's a harsh descriptive for this kind of mentality or attitude, but if you ask me, it's applicable to the fullest extent of the word. The component of Isla Vista that's helped shape our community over time is sometimes treated in a manner that can only be described in that way, and based on their longevity as residents and their living status. Some of these old people who shouldn't be living in IV have made contributions that have resulted in a good community, but as a function of their age, and in some cases home ownership status, they are treated in a manner by some in our community that can only be described as separatory. This could be one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, why engagement from that sector of the community is practically non-existent until a tragedy brings us all together as a community. And that in itself is sad. Back in 2022, when I ran for a seat on the IVCSD board of directors, I knew that I didn't have a chance, but I did it anyways because I wanted to try and make a difference for all Isla Vistans, not one particular demographic or another. I didn't get the position, but I promised certain members of the board, the directors, that I will remain engaged with IVCSD, not with hopes of a seat on the board, but with hopes of unifying Isla Vista residents on matters that either need improvement or need to be celebrated as successes for our community. To the CSD board of directors and staff, I asked to maintain the efforts to reach out to all community members, young and old alike, and continue to treat all as equals within our own little seaside enclave. Remember that fairness, equality, equity, all popular buzzwords apply to all or they apply to no one. To those who feel that some members of our community, myself included, don't belong here because we're old, let me point out one basic fact. Many of us have been here longer than they've been on this earth. We've all been through the same of the many things that are currently being experienced. And while we may not have immediate answers or solutions, we have the time and patience to listen and help if given the chance. Young or old, rich or poor, renter or homeowner, we're all Isla Vistans. We just all respect each other and work together. We will have differences, but we can work past those. And if we wish to do so, be engaged and be involved. That's all I have to really say. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for those comments. Is there any other public comments at this time? All right, I see no further public comments, so we will move on to our discussion and action items. We have item 4.1, the introduction of IVCSD's new community spaces project manager, Leslie Sanchez.
All right, well, Leslie, do you want to join the table real quick right here? We're just doing informal introductions of our new staff. Leslie has taken on the community spaces project manager job, and she is now the person that you go to reserve this room or the community center. And she's taken care of all of those. We had a flood of requests on her first couple weeks on the job, and she handled all of it really well and has reorganized her code system and is just working to keep these, customer service is our number one priority with these spaces. So she's making that happen, and she's taking on the work that Maya had put in place when she started her job. So Maya, do you want to say anything about Leslie? Leslie, you can introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, I'm Maya, the other one. Leslie is incredible. She was my intern last year, and now she's working with me more often, which I love. She's great with the community. She's very approachable. She's eager to go out and attend events and help out with anything. Yeah, it's crazy how quick she picked up the calendar system, considering it was like my little baby and I thought it was so difficult, but she did it so well, and now she's taking it over, and I really couldn't say anything negative about Leslie. She's doing a great job. Thanks, Leslie.
You want to say something? Just introduce yourself.
My name is Leslie. I recently graduated from CSD, and I loved working for IVCSD and with Maya. So that's why I decided to take the job and apply to the job that was a community spaces project manager. And I'm glad I'm here.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. Before I ask directors if they have any questions, I want to ask you if you have any questions of us on the board. Sometimes people can feel a little bit separated from the board, so if you want to know anything about us. But in general, we're very excited to have you. We know that the Community Spaces program has been very, very fast growing. So we know how essential you will be to the team. But if you have any questions for us, please feel free to ask away.
What's your favorite part about working for IVCSD?
I'll try and be short. I can be long-winded. My favorite part about working for IVCSD is that we've expanded more long-term residents, people like yourself, people like Fiona, and the other folks that we've hired. Gives them a chance to stay a part of the Isla Vista community for longer. And that's really hard. So I'm really glad that we have a program, a whole district that helps bring more folks into the fold. Do any directors want to share or have questions that they want to ask Ms. Sanchez? Nope. Director Brandt?
Well, I'll say the thing that I like the most is that we're all on the same team, all working together to improve the community. And we're so lucky that you're a part of that. I think it speaks volumes that you interned with us and wanted to continue on. And that also speaks volumes about you as a manager, Maya, that one of your former interns would want to continue on. So we're really lucky to have you. Thanks for being in this role.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Good to go.
All right, and now we'll move on to our second item, introduction of IVCSD's new community engagement project manager, Fiona Salstich.
Well, we've got 2 in a row of former interns who ended up applying for a full-time job at IVCSD. And so Fiona, it was a serendipitous moment. We had the job open and she was returning to Santa Barbara, and she did a lot of work for us on the mobility plan. She really drove that project and the community engagement around that for over 1.5 years, I think. So we were really happy with what she did. We were so sad she left, but it was a perfect opportunity and she applied in a competitive field, and she earned the job. And so she's been doing a lot of work out in the community. She was doing parking study, survey tabling with Leslie at the co-op yesterday, for example. And she's just been, she's came right back in, didn't miss a beat, and has been helping us so much with all community engagement related activities. And she's also operationalized what Sydney had put in place, and what Maya has been working on. She's keeping it all going, keeping us efficient on social media, in the community in person tabling, flyers that we produce, all these things to let people know who we are and what we're doing. So she's been doing a lot of that. I want to introduce any more, Fiona?
Yeah, it's really been an honor to work with Fiona. I saw her working with Sydney a lot, and I had a couple interactions with her when she was working with us before, but I've been working very closely with her, and it's amazing how much she can take something and expand upon it and show me things I didn't even think about in one avenue. And she's very creative and artistic, which is very helpful when we're producing a lot of material, to have someone who's very consistent. And yeah, like I said, couldn't say enough positive things. She's really been this is a very busy time to jump into, especially as, newly full-time or part-time employees, and there's a lot going on, and none of it would be possible without them. They do so much, and it's really helped the district be able to do a lot more with what we do now. So it's really great to be a part of, and I'm so proud of Fiona and Leslie so far.
Fiona, you want to say anything?
Yeah, can you all hear me over there?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm so happy to be back. I love working for the CSD. I love our mission. I love everything that we stand for. I love the positive community. This is my 3rd position with you guys, I think. I did the mobility plan as well as the compost collective. So I just love being involved, and thank you all so much for the kind words. I'm happy to be back.
All right, thank you. And I'll pose the same question, Fiona, before we let the directors comment or question. If you have any questions for us you want to ask, please feel free.
I think I'm all good. Thank you so much, Marcos.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here. If any directors want to say any specific congratulations, yeah.
Congratulations. We're so excited that you're back.
All right, now we will move on to our 3rd item and our 3rd introduction, the IVCSD's new compost collective project manager, Richard Palafox.
All right, Richard, you want to get up here? So Richard is you're like our science expert. He's got a microscope, all the images of the microbes in our compost. He has been looking at those for us, and he's also just been really getting into managing the compost piles themselves, making sure they're smoothly being taken care of, that we're producing the compost we need to produce, and making sure that our staff is doing the operational work, so that Carly is able to do our program development work of selling compost and getting the collection service going. So he's been doing a great job. He's an expert in composting locally, I think. Like, he's a well-respected person in that arena, and we're lucky to have all his knowledge on our team. Carly, do you want to say?
Yeah, like everything Jonathan said, we're so lucky to have Richard. We actually met at Earth Day and he came up to our table as we were tabling downtown. And he was like, "Can I look at your compost in a microscope?" And I was like, please, please, I've been looking for this for so long. And ever since, he's just been such a huge, crucial component of our team. He's helped bring such positive energy and just in that form, but then also just crucial component of how our operations are running so smoothly right now, and just like moving from the 12-week cycle to the 6 has been just so much easier with Richard, and he's been training all the staff on like how to read temperatures and when to flip the piles so that it finishes properly on time and high quality, and has been looking at our stuff under the microscope, which has just been huge because we're able to like provide consistent quality of our compost when selling it. So yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for everything you do. So happy to have you.
All right. Thank you, Richard, for being here. Like I asked the others, if you have any questions for anyone on the board or any general questions for the board, please feel free to take this opportunity to ask away. Or if you want to ask your question also in some more private time, directors are always approachable too at other times. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions. I would like to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in service to the greater community of Isla Vista in efforts of instilling a regenerative future and access to microbially rich compost.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and congratulations for joining our team. And we're really thankful to have you on our team. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and now we move on to our fourth item, the Isla Vista Coastal Erosion Presentation.
Well, I'll introduce this item. This is one of the items that I had asked for because I had the pleasure of being interviewed by Tara for her senior thesis project earlier this year. Myself and Director Dashler, who couldn't be here tonight, as well as Sydney, all had the chance to talk with her. And I think that what she's managed to do with her research is talk to a lot of different people, because especially as we know in Isla Vista, there's so many different things that are siloed. There's so many different players in the mix when it comes to any issue that we deal with, but especially an issue like coastal erosion is one where there are so many different elements. And so I asked her to come and make this presentation, talk about her research in hopes that this can just be informational for the board as we consider what our role is. There's certainly been a lot of discussion in the community about erosion, some in light of the recent death that we had, but I think some just more broadly about what the future of Del Playa is. And so with that, I'll let you take it away, Tara.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Do I stay here?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Like Spencer said, my name is Tara. I was a UCSB undergraduate. I graduated in June of this past year. And I had the pleasure of doing a senior thesis project with the Environmental Studies Department. And I wrote on IV coastal management. I was like looking at this big issue of like DP. It looks like houses are falling into the ocean. And I was thinking, what the heck are we supposed to do about this? So I took a pretty comprehensive approach and I interviewed a number of different people and came up with some research findings that I hope to share with you guys today. So the first thing that I did was if you can switch the slide. I interviewed a handful of Isla Vista residents as well as some experts in the field kind of related to coastal erosion, and found that there was overall a pretty strong resignation about the fate of DP in Isla Vista. Dan Clement, who works for the county, when I interviewed him, just literally said it's just a matter of time before it's going to go. When I asked two DP residents about how often they think about cliff erosion and cliff safety, both of them resoundingly said not enough. And I also compiled a at the beginning stages of my project, I put out a bunch of interest flyers around DP and also in the West End to try to reach out to long-term Isla Vista residents. And when I submitted that form, it went to a Google form, and one of the people responded on that form. They said, quote, "You people are on a dead-end path," meaning that coastal management is just kind of what it is going to be in Isla Vista, and there's not really a lot of room for change, which I thought was sad because I think there definitely is space for that. And there was also a lot of concern from a lot of the residents about dilapidated housing. One quote from one of the residents I interviewed said, "I know I'm definitely paying more than I should and living in a house that probably should not be lived in." And that seemed to be kind of a general sentiment, that a lot of the housing is quite dilapidated, and they feel like they're paying a lot more money than they should be for properties that are probably not super safe. Moving on. So I also looked at a bunch of different proposed solutions for erosion that are just kind of generally proposed for a lot of different coastal communities and assess their kind of feasibility in Isla Vista. The most common one that always gets brought up is seawalls. I interviewed Charles Lester, who works for UCSB as a researcher. He also is the head of the California Coastal Commission for a number of years as well. He said that there's a lot of antipathy towards seawall development, particularly from the California Coastal Commission, as well as like nonprofits like Surfrider. And that is because seawalls are short-term solutions. They will protect properties for a specific amount of time, but then the sea will continue to rise, and those sea walls will no longer be helpful in preventing erosion. They also will erode the beach in front of a seawall. Everything that's behind it will be protected, but everything in front of it won't be. So you would be, if you were to seawall the entire edge of DP, you would basically deplete your beach, which is not a great solution. And so, I mean, these are often proposed. They have one, there's on the left, that's the 6-7 seawall, and then on the right is one of the seawalls on 6-5 block. If you look at the 6-7 block, that is also the narrowest part of the shore. That's probably why they put the seawall there, but as well, if you look at the downstream side of that seawall, towards Campus Point, you'll notice that the beach gets narrower. That's because there can be downstream erosion. So seawalls can be temporary fixes, but typically aren't usually seen as a good long-term solution. Next slide, please. Another one that we talked about was a groin or a jetty, which, if you guys don't know, is like a perpendicular to the shoreline. You put a bunch of like rocks out, and what it does is it catches sand coming from the littoral drift, and it's supposed to artificially widen your beach, and that can help with cliff erosion, especially with the seaside cliffs, because the waves will not be hitting the cliffs quite so often if you have a wider beach. This was a purely hypothetical concept that I talked to with specifically Charles Lester, Dan Clement, and Lisa Stratton, who's the head of the Cheeto Center. And they suggested what you could do is implement a groin at the edge of IV and UCSB. And what that would do is it would artificially widen the beach on the 6-5 block. It wouldn't be super beneficial with erosion that's happening farther down in Isla Vista, but it would be beneficial for that 6-5 block. Couple of things about this. There's potential setbacks, or it's not setbacks, negative effects. There can be downstream erosion from whatever side that you have that groin. But if you look on this, it's kind of small, but there's a little red pin, which is where the proposed groin would be. And then I also pinpointed Campus Point. Campus Point kind of acts as a natural groin already. If you like know where those rocks point out, and you'll notice that Campus Point has a little bit of a wider beach than other parts in Isla Vista. So downstream erosion would maybe be mitigated a little bit because Campus Point is already a pretty wide beach, and it's like a second groin right next to it. This is considered a midterm solution. It tends to last longer than a seawall, but wouldn't be like a good long-term plan necessarily. And then concerns regarding this would be cost. They tend to be expensive to develop these. Greenhouse gas intensive, you're lugging a lot of heavy material down to the beaches. And then one that is like kind of a simple question is like, where are you accessing the beach? Maybe it's through UCSB's Campus Lagoon, maybe it's all the way at Sands, but I mean, you're lugging very big rocks, since you're gonna have to have big industrial tractors and things like that come in, and trying to find a good way to get them onto the beach is a huge question. Next slide, please.
Sorry, there's always a delay.
No worries. Another proposed midterm solution is called beach nourishment. This is kind of similar to a groin and a jetty in that you take a bunch of sand from up your local watershed and you bring it down to the beach and you artificially widen it. This is sometimes an effective solution. It's kind of a big risk, big reward kind of situation. The cost is pretty intense. It's quite expensive. However, sometimes it could last, your beach could last years being artificially widened, and other times it could get wiped away with one large storm, like one of those ones that we had in January. So this one is, it's kind of a, like I said, it's kind of a high risk, high reward situation. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. There's also a lot of specifications about where you can take the sand that you end up putting onto your beach. Usually it has to be from the same local watershed. Up like further into the mountains is where you get your sand. And the CCC has a lot of specifications about the sand's diameter, presence of pollutants, etc. And you have to be very specific and make sure that you're finding sand that is not going to disrupt the already ecosystem in the sand. So it requires a lot of research. It's expensive, greenhouse gas intensive as well. And again, you have that question of beach access, which is another thing to think about because it's also if you're lugging large tractors or trucks. Next slide, please. Another proposed solution that I talked with Lisa Stratton, who's the head of the Cheadle Center, about was habitat restoration. Some local coastal communities in California have planted really deep-rooted plants to help stabilize eroding cliffs. When I asked Lisa Stratton about this, she said it was probably not a super effective strategy in Isla Vista just because of the nature of the geological makeup of the bluffs. If you look on that picture over there, you can kind of see three distinct zonations of the cliff. There's a sandy soil layer at the top, and then there's like a molluscan layer. Both of those are really soft. And then underneath it is Sisquoc shale, which is quite impervious. So if you were to plant deep-rooted plants, the roots would not be able to get into that Sisquoc shale. So it would really only stabilize the top third of the bluffs, which could be effective in some way, but likely wouldn't be as effective as if you have really long, deep-rooted roots. So this was a solution that we thought was not going to be super effective here, but she did propose one mitigation strategy, which was removing irrigation within 2,000 feet, or give or take, of the bluff edge in IV to help mitigate erosion. A little bit about bluffs is that when they're saturated with water, they're more likely to fail. So if you can get rid of regularly watered areas, so like anything grassy, and take out that grass and replace it with, you know, drought resistant plants, or maybe like more like sandy volleyball courts or something like that, that would be a good way to do a small thing to help with mitigating erosion in IV. The other more common, or I shouldn't say more common, but the Isla Vista Bluff policy is like the current coastal management strategy that's being used in Isla Vista. It's run by Santa Barbara County, their planning division, or not planning division, I'm sorry. But basically what this is it is a plan that says that once a DP property is within 20 feet of the cliff's edge, they have one of three options. They can, one, do a site-specific study where they hire a private geotechnical engineer to assess the site, see if it's structurally sound, and then determine if it's safe, and then they send that over to the county. They can also cut back the property. If they cut back the property, they have to cut the property back all the way to, I believe it's 30 feet from the cliff's edge. So they have to take a significant chunk of their property off. And they have to do this before it reaches 10 feet because the cliff's edge, you know, it takes a long time to do all of that additional construction. Or they can do a different site-specific study for any of the properties that have foundations underneath, like the caissons, which you see in this picture right here. Property owners hire a geotechnical engineer. They evaluate the strength of that and determine if everything is safe and if they need to have additional caissons, or if some of the caissons are structurally unsound and they will have to remove those. So it's sort of like a managed retreat policy. You can switch to the next slide. But it's operated through the county. You probably have a couple questions. These were the questions I had when I learned about the bluff policy. One, how often are these bluffs assessed? County assessors come out at least 4 times a year, as well as after very large storm events where there's more likely to be a bluff failure. And when the bluff face is inspected, it's via public right-of-ways, so the beach, or through drone images. So they're never actually going onto the properties to assess. They're doing it from below. you might ask about these geotechnical reports. They're hiring a private consultant. Can they basically pay to get told that it's safe? Not necessarily. The county has their own geotechnical consultant that will assess the validity of each of the private property reports. So there's like kind of like a fail-safe check as well. If a property doesn't comply with a violation notice, meaning that they're within that 20 feet property, and that's like a new thing, and they haven't decided to do a study, cut back, or anything else, they will get fined. They have 30 days to address the violation or enter into an abatement schedule, and if they don't, it's fined, and the longer that they put it off, the more money that they are fined. And then finally, how long are those geotechnical reports viable? Until the cliff face changes. So once the cliff starts eroding on that property or near that property, then all surrounding properties will have to redo their assessments. Okay, next slide. There's another thing that I looked at in my thesis, not a ton, but this was something that was proposed in the California legislature a while back. It was called SB 83, which was our sea level rise revolving loan program. And essentially what this would do would allow local jurisdictions to buy at-risk coastal properties, like properties along Del Playa, at low interest loans, and then rent them back out until the properties are no longer inhabitable. So basically what this does is it allows private property owners to get out of their kind of financially dubious investment and then have basically the government bail them out. It was vetoed by Gavin Newsom in October 2021 because it doesn't, he said, quote, "it does not comprehensively address the costly activities envisioned, likely to be carried out over decades." I mean, it's a huge financial burden on the California government. So he ultimately vetoed it. And then David Allen, the California legislator who proposed it, then proposed another one that was slightly modified. It was SB 1078. This one, I think the difference was that the government had to buy the properties now at market value. They couldn't use eminent domain. They leased the properties back, and then that lease revenue is what would pay back that low interest rate loan. It was vetoed by Gavin Newsom in, I think, 2023, but it could still technically be overridden by a 2/3 vote in both houses. So chances are it's not going to pass, but letting you know that it's not dead in the water. And this is something that like Isla Vista would be like a good candidate for, because this is not intended to like buy out like $1 million properties in California. This is meant for, I mean, I guess DP is $1 million properties, but I mean, you're not buying some like fancy schmancy millionaires, like big, you know, like vacation home. It's meant for multi-unit housing or housing of people that are not like super high income and leasing those back out. Yeah, and again, the concerns and the cost, the government is essentially assuming the financial risk of having at-risk coastal properties. Next slide, please. And then this was something that it kind of indirectly correlates with coastal erosion. I know it doesn't maybe on the surface seem like it fits, but I'm sure you guys know quite a bit about the Isla Vista Master Plan. This was proposed, I believe, in 2016 and was ultimately denied. But the gist of it was that it would rezone parts of Isla Vista and allow for building up in IV as opposed to building out. And you could add housing. Specifically, when I talked to Dan Clement, in that Embarcadero loop was kind of what they were mainly focusing on. And that additional housing would inevitably offset the inevitable future housing losses on DP. So as housing gets chipped away by that Isla Vista Bluff policy, you know, you would be able to relocate people or like reset the housing losses in a different place in Isla Vista. Concerns about this cost, I think originally it went over budget when it was initially trying to get proposed. There's also a lot of issues with providing incentives for property owners to want to redevelop. Property owners are making so much money off of their properties right now, even if they're not putting that much investment into them, because there's just like a huge housing bubble in demand in Isla Vista. So incentivizing property owners to do that is one issue. And then also the California Coastal Commission would have to approve everything. And I know that there is protection of oceanside views according to the California Coastal Act, which they had run into issues with previously. So something else to look for. So when I was doing my research, I kind of ended it a little prematurely. I wish that I had more time to do it. So what I had recommended doing to continue this research would be to further conduct community engagement. I say here primarily with the student population in Isla Vista, but honestly long-term residents would be beneficial to the study as well too, to assess community goals related to sea level rise adaptation and bluff safety. I only was able to interview a handful of people, but I think having like a larger data pool to pick from would give you a better idea of what people's general ideas are. I would also engage with other relevant stakeholders. The IVRPD was not able to meet with me during this time. I didn't get to meet with Beacon. They do like consulting in coastal management. The UCSB Housing Department, I was never able to get a hold of, and something like Surfrider Foundation. And then also, most importantly, the DP property owners who refuse to talk to me. So getting them on board would be great. And then also designing a communication strategy. Hopefully, once you get those stakeholders kind of in a room together, at least sort of talking, to have, you know, a consultant or someone who's there to facilitate dialogue and create a common language. Erosion is really technical, and there's a lot of things that people don't understand. Planning is really technical, and so finding a common language for everyone is really pivotal so that everyone's kind of on the same page. Next slide, please. I'm almost done, I swear. Then my long-term coastal management recommendations, just thinking purely in the long term, would be that one, we need to kind of burst this housing bubble in Isla Vista, which means that UCSB needs to build more housing to help offset the strain. Hopefully that like lowers the amount of, or it lowers it so that property owners maybe have more incentive to consider redevelopment. I think maintaining the Ivy Bluff policy as the primary mechanism of managed retreat in DP is a really smart option. Like it's working, it's effective, they're monitoring it regularly. And also in this rate, private owners are the ones that are incurring the financial burden of these at-risk properties instead of like the government or like local jurisdictions like you would with a property buyout. I mean, obviously that financial burden probably in some cases then dispersed onto the tenants. So that's something to think about. But yeah, the Ivy Bluff policy is sound. I would also recommend start campaigning the Ivy Master Plan for proposal once it could be pre-proposed, because I think at its maximum, the original plan could add 1,500 units of housing in Isla Vista, which would be great for the housing crisis and would also allow for, again, the inevitable housing losses that will be on DP to get offset as well. I also recommended establishing some kind of contingency funding for future DP residents in the event that they need to be vacated abruptly. I think in 2017, when the houses fell, all of their 10 residents had to be abruptly leave their home, and they had to pay for temporary housing out of pocket. Some of them lost, the food that they had there when they had to abruptly vacate, or some of their belongings and things like that. So having some kind of funding in place could, I think, really help with the resiliency of this community in the event that something bad happened from DP and there's a bluff failure. And then the other one I would recommend is encouraging or requiring DP properties to include a clause in their lease that regarding bluff safety and the status of that property in relation to its geotechnical study. The geotechnical studies are publicly available technically, but you have to go into a county office to read them because of California copyright law. They can't just be put online or anything. So while they're available, I don't think a lot of people are accessing them. So I think making that more transparent would be a really good thing. I think Kirsten and I talked about maybe making a portal where you could see every DP property and look at their geotechnical studies or whatever the DP properties are willing to share about the safety of their properties. And then last slide, next slide please. I just kind of want to end it on a quote from the Isla Vista Master Plan that I thought was really special. It says, Isla Vista represents a tremendous opportunity. Most characteristics inherent to a good neighborhood and town planning are already in place here in rough form. I did this project because I loved Isla Vista and I hated to see, I didn't want to see it, DP just fall off of the cliffside. And I thought, this is a really special place and we have the roots and the possibilities to, to factor in long-term coastal management. It's just going to require a lot of effort and a lot of collaboration with stakeholders. And I wanted to plant the seeds for that with this thesis, and hopefully it's helpful in maybe continuing that going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You provided a lot of useful information. I'm going to start with some questions.
Yeah.
One of your more recent slides about property owners are required to do a study 4 times a year, but those studies you can only access physically in a county building,
So
like in a county library or something?
they're not actually doing the geotechnical studies 4 times a year. The bluffs are getting assessed 4 times
Got
a
it.
year. So they're like, if they notice that the bluff face has changed, like there's been some kind of failure, then the property owner has to go back and hire a geotechnical engineer to do a new study.
Got
Those are quite intensive.
Got it.
But you're right, you can access those. They are available at a county, I can't remember, it's like a county office or clerk's office or something. But they're not like publicly available for just for like anyone to read on the internet. So that's kind of the information's a little buried.
Yeah, no, did you discover the reasoning behind that, or was there like a black and white
I
stated
was
reason?
told California copyright law bars them from being able to publicly share that information, like as it is written in the geotechnical study.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, I have a lot of like more thoughts from that answer. I know it's not up to you, but yeah. Let's see. Yeah, do any other directors have questions right now they want to ask? Director Freeman.
So during one of our previous meetings, talking about issues involving cliff erosion and some of the, as it interfaces with some of the policy decisions we've been making, somebody, member of the public, actually who's in the audience today, had brought up a potential concern that putting in heavier weight, taller fencing along the edge of the bluff would end up requiring pylons to get driven through the cliff face.
Right.
That would then potentially deteriorate the cliff. And I was wondering if that could be commented on with relation to your expertise here.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to preface that I'm not like a geologist by training. I just was an undergraduate student, but that does make sense that
I'm not a politician by training. So.
Okay, that would make sense that when you apply like more heavy like things into the bluff face, like the bluff is like surprisingly soft, and so the more that you agitate it, the more likely it is that there's going to be failures. Now I think it's kind of an issue of like what you like care for more. Like, do we want to mitigate cliff erosion completely, or do we want to help public safety? You know, so I think there's pros and cons to having higher fences that would require you to go into the bluff, but I don't think it's like so significant, like it would completely wipe away. I mean, like you've seen the caissons of those like actual like building foundations, they're huge. It wouldn't need anything that strong for something like fences or like higher fences. So I think it just comes down to what the community prioritizes at that point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So your answer reminded me of another question I had that's a little bit more in the weeds. And so I had never heard of the term the caisson before, but I've seen those for my entire time living in IV. And they move around and disappear and reappear at different properties. Do you have an understanding of how those came to be? Like, did a property owner in 1970, make a large hole somehow and fill it with concrete, and that is the development of these caissons? Or do you have any guesses or ideas?
That I have no idea. I mean, I would imagine that those caissons have been there for like a significant period of time, and they've become exposed since there's been erosion, but I imagine it was like that where they drilled a big hole. I do know that when the caissons are considered to be unstable, they will like pull them out of the cliff face, which I'm not sure how that doesn't disrupt the cliff face geologically, but the county says that it's safer to have those removed than to just have them up. And you can see those dispersed all along DP. If you go on the walk along the beach, like you can see there's like big, huge like pieces of caisson that are still like embedded in the ground, which makes me think, yeah, that it was like cemented from top to bottom. But I can't speak definitively on that.
Yeah, it's such a strange like view, to realize that at one point this was like a safer place to build. I mean, in one of your the one with the continued that slide, we can see some broken caissons that didn't get to be removed in like a deliberate way, but the ocean took them. My more meaningful question is, do you have a goal to pursue this research further, or in some way keep going on this path of knowledge?
Technically, no. I mean, I'm here today. I knew that, like, with unfortunately, with the passing of the student, this came to my, or that people were talking about it more frequently because I read an article, and that's why I reached out to Spencer, because this was kind of similar to my area of expertise, and I wanted to pass this along as much as I could. I would love to continue this research independently. However, like, I wouldn't get paid to do it, so it would probably just be more of like a passion project. But I'm always happy to provide the expertise from my research. And in a perfect world, I would keep helping out.
Of course, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing with us. Any directors have questions? I'll go to the public then. Is there any public comment or questions for our lesson?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I got a hold of your thesis, compliments of Director Brandt, when it first came out, and I was one scientist to another. I was highly impressed.
Thank you so much.
And there was a lot of truth in there. In fact, it was all truth. It's all fact. I love the way it was presented, the facts made on it. Now, the caissons, I personally know who put those in there. Brian Kolich, who's a friend of mine. He's worked construction in the area for decades, and he's a general contractor. And he's put quite a few of those in there. So they've been in there for a while, and they were put in, initially before the properties were put on there. They were designed to last. And you can see that they're lasting, but they ain't gonna last forever. We know this for a fact, which leads to the methods of mitigation that were discussed. Seawalls, the empathy against those is highly understood, and I've never been a proponent of this. Being as a semi-native of Miami, Florida, we have a lot of coastal influence that happens there, and this is why we have these things called intracoastals, which leads to the barrier that you were discussing. Those work really good. Other things that could possibly work, the restoration efforts that you discussed and everything. I think it's going to come down to a combination of methods, not one particular method or another, but of course this would increase cost.
Yeah.
One method that wasn't discussed, and I'm not saying it was overlooked or anything, it probably just was, I don't know, but artificial reef. And that's something that helped off of Vandenberg Air Force Base. They put a bunch of spent rocket boosters. They drilled them with holes and sunk them in. That's an artificial reef, and it seems to be stopping the erosion along Hollister Ranch pretty good, or that area there. Another thing too to consider with the cliffs themselves is a method I've seen employed on Pacific Coast Highway. Now Malibu's different. You don't have the ocean slamming against those cliffs. You just have the usual winter mudslides. But one of the methods that they've used there that I've seen is pretty effective in holding the cliffs together is that fencing that they bolt into the cliff, but you would have to bolt it into the cliff. And you have a cliff that's shale rock, it's constantly collapsing. So I don't know if this would be a good method, maybe some sort of an overlap at the top and then working its way down. One thing we got to remember is the beach below, the sand is a superficial effect.
Yeah.
It's all rock underneath. It's all rock. So that could come to our advantage in a number of ways.
Yeah.
But I think, your presentation, your thesis were absolutely fantastic. I loved it. And thank you, Spencer, for connecting me to that. It was great reading. Took me a couple days to go back.
Took me a long time to write.
So yeah, I get the feeling, yeah. I'm on a few patents that took a long time. but no, I really admire your enthusiasm in the work, and I hope you do stick around to see this possibly happen in at a paid capacity.
Hopefully.
I say to the good people, please stay, just please stay. But I seriously believe that combination of methods is probably going to be your best approach.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet for this. But you can have what we call mixed fruit round, which is, a combination of different methods. So something to consider. But in the question of the caissons, I do know who put those in there personally.
Do you know that if it was like drilled down into the?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
It was bored into the ground. and the concrete was poured. Well, first the rebar was set in there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have concrete pours without rebar. And then they poured the concrete in place and they built on top of it. So, and that was, there was different eras when that happened. So there's different ages of caissons on those cliffs that you're seeing. The ones that are the oldest are the ones that are A, the most exposed, and B, the most vulnerable. So something to consider on that. But they've lasted, but it's not a solution.
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm one of the people on the bluff, one of the long-term residents, and I tried to sign up, but I think our communication
Our paths got so, yeah.
I think our communication went like this. But anyway, thank you for reaching out to everybody.
Yeah.
That was really nice. And being a homeowner on the bluff, of course, we try to get all the information about it that we can.
Yeah.
And there's one researcher, I'm not sure what his title is at UCSD. I think his name is Paul.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and
Paul taught the coastal management class that I took.
And he's been studying the bluff for like 30 years, or I don't know how many years he's been studying it. He comes by and measures and everything. And I remember going out to talk to him one day, what are you doing? And so we got to talking, and I said, I cannot sleep at night because I think of the bluff out at Shoreline Park and how like this much falls off at once. There's a crack and all this falls off. And I just, I'm afraid I'm going to wake up one morning and that will be it. And he said, no, that will never happen here because a bluff is not a bluff, is not a bluff. The makeup of the bluff at Shoreline Park is completely different from the makeup. And I was just commenting, and you can comment on my comments, that as you said, ours is softer and ours will crumble. You won't get those big cracks, which is good. And he also said, it's not the same the whole length of IV. The composition of the bluff isn't the same. So there are some areas that excavate more, some areas that are more stable. And, it's just a dynamic, interesting geological thing. And I really liked what you opened with, the feeling of resignation, because we've kind of felt that, like, where's the help? Can't we plant? Can't we, do these things that will stabilize? It may not all, the roots may not all go all the way down to the rock level, but it will stabilize the top. And so anyway, I'm just very glad that the discussion is open and people are getting educated about the bluff. And that's it. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Yes. I mean, one thing that I talked with Spencer about quite a bit was that there's a handful of researchers that are at the university that are doing pretty extensive research on the Isla Vista bluffs. There's also a handful of people that are doing research on UCSB for their sea level rise plan. And it just kind of boggles my mind that there's so many like world-class researchers right by our door, and they have the information that we would need to kind of really develop a good plan, and yet we're not talking to each other. And I think like getting that together and finding a way to have collaboration would be like a really easy way to kind of already utilize the resources that are already here and local and the data that's already present, and hopefully connect that with IVCSD or the Santa Barbara County and put it all together to hopefully facilitate some kind of plan that's a little more pieced together.
Yes.
I'll just echo what they said, that you did a great job. That was very informative, and I'm just thinking how great it would be for more people to see your study and all that you found. Good job. A couple questions that I had that like could be potential opportunities for us, but also just like as a person who's lived on DP before in my life, I would see so many just like chunks one morning, like falling into the ocean, or, looking out and you feel a little shake. Like, oh, what was that? Anyways, dramatic storytelling. But my point being, like, you might not know the answer to these, but I'm wondering, like, how you report bluff face changes, and if that's something that only the owners of the building can do, or can tenants somehow report that as well? Like if there was like a big chunk falling off?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I believe from my understanding, the way that it's typically gone has been if tenants feel a shake or they see that something has changed, they'll contact the property owner, and then the property owner would have to be the one that would make a change. I don't think there's very many tenants, and I mean, I can't speak on this definitively, but I'm sure there's not very many tenants that are seeing a bluff failure and then reporting to the county, you know, or like know who the county assessor is that they could talk to. So I think if we could find a way to open that dialogue and have it so that, you know, that could be another great thing to include in a clause, you know, on a lease to say like, if you see a bluff failure or you notice a change in the thing, you know, contact this person, and then, you know, they could go forward. And I'm also curious to know, and this is a question on my friend, is like, what constitutes a bluff failure? Because, you know, stuff like tiny rocks fall down all the time in every little place, but what's big enough to be considered a failure at the point that you would need a new geotechnical study? That's another thing.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I was curious if maybe that might need a mediator between like tenant and like landlord to start like facilitating conversations about like where to go to report something that might be concerning. I don't know if that exists, so thank you for saying that. And then also there was another thing that you had recommended about abruptly vacating a home and having like a fund for that.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was like a really interesting thing that we could potentially think about, like a housing vacancy mediation fund. Obviously, like funding is something that we're always looking how to spend our money, but I thought that was a really cool idea that you had.
Yeah, and the hope is that you would literally never need to use it if the Ivy Bluff policy is sound enough. But you know, sometimes you have that like massive bluff failure like we did in 2017. It was like 7 feet or something like that. And thank God nobody got hurt, but the balcony fell and then they needed to abruptly move everybody. And I think I read in the article when they talked about it that all those girls, there's like 10 girls living in the house, they were all able to find a different house to all live together in Isla Vista in the middle of the year. It was like January. And I was like, that would never happen now. So you would know that like that time that they would spend in temporary housing would now be longer. And so, you know, it would be a huge financial burden to them. And not to say that you would need to, you know, cover the cost of everything, but I think having some funds in place would be a good way to just, yeah, have some kind of resiliency in the event that something bad happens again like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any public comment or question on Zoom? All right, I'll come back to the board if there's any board comment. One question, Director Brandt.
Well, thank you again for being here. You did a great job, and really appreciate all the information in one place. I have a question for you, and then I'll have another comment, which is, so I'm looking at actually a picture on slide 10. Sorry, Jonathan, I know you.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'll get it back up.
But the so we get, I think, a lot of questions from people about the image that's there where there's a concrete balcony that's sort of overhanging the face of the bluff.
Yeah.
And in this picture, there's a bunch of caissons there too. So when people see that and they wonder, how is that allowed? What's the reason?
I believe balconies are tricky. I'm not 100% sure if balconies are considered to technically be part of the structure, but I can't imagine that they would allow the balconies. I think from my understanding, the caissons are meant to stabilize the structural foundation of the property, and the property would then include that balcony, especially if it's like a cement balcony. There's some balconies that are like wood. Those are not considered to be technically part of the structural foundation of it, but something like a cement balcony like that would likely be considered to be part of the whole thing. So if they're saying that on the whole this entire property is considered structurally sound, that also includes the balcony, even if the balcony is overhanging. The hope would be that this geotechnical study was done while the balcony was already overhanging, so that they would, like, you know, be assessing the most recent version of the cliff face. But I don't know if this is another property where, you know, maybe it had changed recently and they needed to do another private geotechnical study. But that would be my guess, is that if it's structurally with the rest of the foundation, you could consider the overlaying balcony to be structurally sound as well, because it's connected to it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very helpful. And so the geotechnical study is an important component of
Yeah,
that.
huge component.
I guess the comment that I have that I really appreciate about your research, a couple of things. The first is that you talk about the fact that, we've got all these different options and ideas, and certainly none of them are perfect. There's definitely not a silver bullet here. And I think that that is something that we certainly need to grapple with, right? It also means that, we know that if we just continue on the course in this sort of managed retreat sort of way, that in a certain amount of time, we are going to lose all those units of housing. And I think that should really just, for all of us, my commentary, renew our and bolster our urgency on housing, which although we don't have a direct rollover, hopefully our efforts on parking will help be something that will be able to help move that forward with the master plan. And my other comment is that I sort of accidentally went on a field trip this weekend to see another community where this is happening. Really, I was just walking on the beach and I realized, oh wow, I'm in San Clemente and there's a basically bluff face that looks very similar to Isla Vista, except it's not directly touching the ocean. It's separated by a train track to the beach. But it's even higher than Ivy. Ivy's bluff, and you also got a lot of apartments that are right up there. So I know I mentioned in the past, like there's no community like Isla Vista where we've got all these high density housing right on the bluff, which is still true if you think of it as a bluff that's oceanside. But I was very interested to see that because what I also saw there was the crater of a giant landslide that had taken place. Come to find out that a lot of that happened earlier this year and impacted a number of properties, displaced like 30 residents. So it's just one of the things you mentioned about the legislation and Newsom's veto was his statement that we need a more comprehensive solution that takes into account all these communities. And I think that in that context is really true. We do need something because there are other communities that are facing this. And this is something that I really hope we can figure out a way to engage our federal and state partners at trying to find a solution, because it's an issue of statewide concern and not just one here locally, although we certainly feel it, especially in the wake of tragedy. But the last thing that I will throw out there is one of your next steps was about Beacon, which is I think the something erosion, and I just know that the E stands for erosion. Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about just a synopsis of what it is, what they do?
I didn't have a ton of research into Beacon because by the time that you gave me a contact for Beacon when I was doing my research, it was too late for me to have include too many people. But from my understanding, I believe they're a consulting group who specializes in coastal management, specifically around things like erosion. Like they're the people that you would go to if you were interested in doing something like beach nourishment or a groin or a jetty, something like that. And they would be able to kind of guide you in the right direction. Other than that, I can't speak on what they do. Definitely something worth looking into for sure. But that might be another great example of someone who would be like an expert that you could bring in that also would be able to account for the financial costs and things of some of these proposed strategies. Like scientists are going to end their commentary on a certain strategy by being like, this is the geological impact of it and it's expensive. Whereas someone at Beacon might be able to be like, okay, this is literally how far you would have to go. This is how expensive this would be, which would be hopefully more helpful than something me or any other scientist would do.
Totally, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm certainly very interested in seeing how we can partner with Beacon as a joint powers authority that includes the County of Ventura, Santa Barbara, as well as all the coastal cities along that route from Port Hueneme up to Goleta. Even though we're not a city, it does seem to me like it could be a good forum for us to explore participating in and joining as a way to investigate some of the things that you brought to us and potentially move things forward. So just wanted to throw that out there for our consideration.
Thank you for those comments, Director Brandt. Questions? Do any other directors have questions or comments this time?
If you wouldn't mind, I'm still not quite clear about the assessments that happen.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what the county does 4 times a year is a pretty cursory
Yeah.
assessment because they're only using drones and public access.
Yes.
So they're kind of eyeballing it to see if anything's changed, and then and that is called a geotechnical study?
No.
That's just
So
called
that's
what?
just an assessment of the bluff face. They would use, I think they'll have drone imagery and they probably would take that like directly above. And in drone imagery, like if you overlay one photo with the next photo, you can see how far back the
Sure.
cliff has eroded. And then also like, you know, if you see like a bunch of rocks at the bottom of like a cliff face, you'll be like, oh, there probably was a failure there.
And so that is the thing that is copyright protected, and so it's
No.
not publicly accessible.
That is not the thing that's copyright protected. That is the county going out and seeing what the composition of the bluff is. If the composition of the bluff has changed in a specific spot, maybe they see all the big rocks there, or they compile their drone imagery over one another and then notice, hey, this has gone back like 3 feet in the past, 6 months. Then they're going to reach out to the property owner and say, hey, your bluff face or your property's bluff composition has changed since the last time that we assessed this property. Now you will need to go hire a private geotechnical engineer to conduct a site-specific study on your property specifically. And then that they have to do independently. And then once they have that study, they'll send it to the county who will assess its validity. And then, you know,
and so that county study is not a publicly
that's a really good question. And I don't know that off the top of my head. I imagine I couldn't find anything like any of the drone imagery or anything like that, but I imagine if it's done by the county, it would be more publicly available than something from a geotechnical and like a private geotechnical engineering firm.
And I believe we heard from Supervisor Laura Capps recently that all the property owners have to do an assessment annually.
Oh, that's
or more often if they're prompted by events. But that there is a great shortage of people who are actually qualified to do those. So it's very difficult for them to get that done sometimes.
Okay.
So do you have any sense, are they people current on that, or are they, and if they're not current, regardless of how good their excuse might be, do they just get fined, or it doesn't like trigger an inhabitability finding?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My assumption would be if they couldn't get a geotechnical engineer within those 30 days, they could maybe enter into like that abatement schedule and then just say like, you know, get it in as soon as possible, and they maybe wouldn't be fined. My understanding, I mean, I talked exclusively to people who worked at the county, so if things are not up to date, I don't think they're about to go tell a student researcher like, we're a little bit behind and I'm not sure if these properties are up to date. But if from what they're telling me, it seems like everything is up to recent, but I mean, I didn't know about the fact that there's not that many geotechnical engineers that are qualified to do this.
Well, and Supervisor Capps has obviously taken a great deal of interest in this subject, and we're in conversation with her. So this is certainly something we can follow up with her about.
Sure. And I think I also didn't know if those assessments now have to happen annually. That might be a new development, but it wasn't written into the bluff policy when they updated it in 2021. So it could be changed since then.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments and that question. Is there any other comments or questions from board members?
So UCSB needs a geotechnical engineering program. If we don't already have it. We can pass that on to Kirsten.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing your research with us. I'm sure you'll get more questions even outside of this meeting from interested folks, and look forward to hearing if you do get the chance to keep studying this or not. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to move on to our fifth section, reports. We will start with 5.1, reports from members of the board. Do any members of the board have reports they would like to share? Director Brandt.
Just a shout out to our community engagement staff who's been out there tabling very frequently, and I've had a chance to be out there with Fiona and Leslie as well. So just want to say thank you for all you're doing, because it helps get the word out about what we do.
Yeah, they're doing great. They really are.
I'll share. I had the opportunity to be a part of the EVPLA's. First of all, we just had a recent panel on community safety and specifically highlighting restorative justice practices. And so we heard questions from residents and students in Embarcadero Hall. This was last Monday, and it was a very fruitful conversation. Most of the questions were directed towards our law enforcement partners, but it was a very informative time to be there. And yeah, I felt really grateful to be a part of the group, part of this important table. I get to share some of the amazing things that we get to contribute to community safety. And let's see, what else has been going on? I got to table also, like Director Brandt mentioned, a few times on campus during my lunch break out in the arbor. It was really fun. Yeah, I think that concludes my report for now. Yeah, any other directors? All right, now we'll move on to 5.2, reports from our standing and ad hoc committees. All right, and then we'll move on to 5.3, our report from district council.
Thank you. I just have a quick update. You guys have a lot going on in the district. Jonathan and I are working on a lot of different projects all at the same time. He's balancing a lot of plates. So on my end, I am hoping to bring forward a couple policies to the policy committee, at least by the end of the year. And that would be the graffiti abatement policy, the public art policy, and then a recommendation, at least at this point, for the Government Claims Act policy. I recently met with the consultants doing the parking study, Dixon, and we had a really great discussion, and I will be working with them going forward on implementing Isla Vista's parking program, whatever that looks like going forward. But they are still in the very early stages of their study, so I am kind of just, there as needed at this point. And then I think other than that, we are just chugging along. So I just wanted to give you all a quick update on my current projects.
Awesome, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item 5.4, report from our general manager and staff.
Not to put you on the spot, do you have anything, Maya, for community engagement, or I'll just
I can talk about
just
things.
a couple if you have anything. I didn't know you were gonna be here. So.
Okay. No, a couple things. One, we've switched gears from tabling about broad CSD to kind of narrowing into parking study, and also talking about our festival that's coming up this weekend, and a couple other events that are happening during Halloween. I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of them already, but definitely been keeping me busy. I think other engagement things. My brain is pretty much parking
That's
in the
all that
festival.
we're doing.
And town hall.
Yeah.
Still parking. I think that's I'm really excited for this weekend. You can make it on Saturday, 12 to 6. Please come out. All the vendors are excited. Everything's starting to feel very solidified. So I think it's going to go really well. We have over 50 different groups participating and making this happen. And that doesn't even include all the musical acts. So should be great.
And I had a question from a member of the community about where the haunted house is happening.
Yes, good question. It will be happening at St. George Youth Center on the 27th and the 28th. And then on the 30th, they'll be doing pumpkin carving. So keep your eyes out for that. It's open to everyone in the community. And I had a talk with Raul, and he said that the haunted house is very scary this year. So be prepared.
And they're funded by our grant program, and we're going to be sending out a door hanger to every household starting tomorrow in Isla Vista with all these events and our safety tips that we always have.
And locations, that would be.
It'll have locations, address, and everything.
We're also going to be knocking on some people's doors tomorrow, so they'll get to hear it from us firsthand, all the things going on.
Thank you, Maya. And so other things going on, the Compost Collective, we're working on sales still. They're starting to build. I made a sale personally. I made two for my own personal network. So there's growing interest in our products. We're waiting on the LAFCO report before we move forward on the collection fees. So we're not able to implement a fee probably until we get our situation finalized with LAFCO, which is what the executive officer said. So that no progress there. We have all the information for that. We just will need to then go through the motions with activating the trash power. We had an issue with the contract with Earthcomb. So we're putting that on pause until the next board meeting, just with the billing and payment clause in the contract didn't work for them. So we're gonna come back with a revision that hopefully can work for both us and them at the next board meeting. IV Safe is tomorrow from 9 to 11. We were looking to have good participation at that. We're talking about community festivals, fentanyl use, long-term neighbor concerns was added to the agenda. What's Halloween update in general, and the Ivy Bluffs, of course. We have the termites were tented. We were tented for termites successfully, so we're good to go there. And it was a smooth process, only 2 days. And for the parking study, we have 400 responses in 5 days already. That's 40% of our goal. But we wanted to get to 1,000. Maybe we'll up our goal now to a higher number. But yeah, like Maya said, town hall next week, 6:30 on Wednesday. It's more of an open forum, so we'll just give an update of what the project is, what's happening, the data we have so far, and people can say whatever they want for an hour. So that's what we did for the mobility plan. We eased into it by not a lot of structure. And we also have focus groups next week. So we are recruiting for those. If you know anybody super passionate about parking, we're especially doing families, students, and business owners. Anyone else? Those are the three main ones. Yeah, those are the three main ones we're doing next week. If we have people from other groups that are, critical mass, we can fit them into. Tomorrow, myself and the library committee are going to meet with the county on discussing what the new zone would look like if they made a library administration zone for Isla Vista. There's no details. They sent us a list of questions. We sent back a list of questions, and there's no answers to any of them. We're gonna talk to figure it out what we would want it to look like. I guess it's the first time we're doing it. And then I'm meeting with the Goleta city manager on Thursday to follow up and see where they're at. And he has to meet. And Maya didn't mention, but we're doing bluffs. Oh, you did mention it. Never mind. We're doing bluff safety outreach.
Not 100%, but yeah, we're also doing that. So we're canvassing tomorrow about parking, and then we're focusing specifically on DP to hand out some of our cliff safety brochures and just talk about some ideas and just get people having the conversation, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. But we're pairing it with a lot of other things, so hopefully they'll take them all.
Yeah, and we've been having social media ads run all of fall quarter so far on cliff and bluff safety. So, and then I have jury duty next week, Santa Barbara at least. Yeah, again. Hopefully I call off or they call me off, but I find out on Sunday night. That's it for me.
Right. Thank you for that update. And now we will move into our sixth area of closed session. Council, would you read the closed session into the record?
Yes, thank you. So the board will meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.95. The claimant is Peter Nuschel, agency claimed against Isla Vista Community Services District.
All right, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, guys.
If anybody wants to wait.
Oh, okay.
Thank you guys so much. This
Yeah.
is great.
I was happy to purchase the page, and yeah, if you guys have further questions, you guys brought up really good questions last time. I don't like pieces.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, but this is good.
That's why everyone's like, we need part two.
Yeah, I know, just my little passion project on the side,
Yeah.
between my 40-hour work week and, everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, just helping everyone graduate on time.
I know, yeah, that's my plan. Well, it was nice to
Yeah,
meet you.
super nice to see you again.
Take care.
Thank you.
Can you jump to Joyce Spencer?
Do we have any like first aid packs for chance? Oh, I didn't know.
Give the agenda.
I do.
What is this called? Closed session with?
It just says closed session and it says 6-1 liability claims pursuant to government code.
Liability.
Yes.
Are we getting new floors?
These are down to protect our current floors while IVRPD is using the space for like 8 or 6 days in a row, I think. I think it's like staging for one of their events.
Okay. It's fine, I'll grab them. Okay, thank you.
And if it's not robust enough, there's 2 more in the center.
Okay.
Jonathan, can you take there's like a J. Freeman maybe?
Yeah.
You see that? Can you put that in the waiting room?
Yes.
issue before, by the way, was that I was on the Wi-Fi.
You were on the way, and it just
My
wasn't
phone
working.
reconnected to Wi-Fi.
Where is it?
For some
Yeah,
reason.
it's in
I'm
your
not
bed.
used to it.
It's always in your bed.
I always think, oh,
Okay.
but
Why?
walk
Come with
all the way
us,
over there.
Yeah, yeah, walk with us.
Is
Well,
there
I'm
pizza?
gonna walk with you. I have my bike for why would I?
I think we're,
Yeah.
yeah, we're good to go to.
Okay.
Sorry.
If council could please take us out of the closed session.
Yes, the board met in closed session to discuss item 6.1, a liability claim pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.95 regarding the claimant Peter Nuschel against the Isla Vista Community Services District. Direction was given to staff, no reportable action taken.
All right, thank you. Now move on to our future meeting dates and future agenda items. Do any directors wish to bring future agenda items?
The future list is small, so if you have anything, there's not a lot coming up right now.
One thing I was kind of interested in, and I think we heard about this months ago, about seeing if there was information from the county about like scooters, the electronic scooters in Isla Vista and safety around that. I don't know if we have.
It's on my list here, scooter policy update, but it's been hard to get any response on basic stuff from Public Works, so
Got it.
we'll keep, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Well, it's in the mix, they know, but we have other things in the mix
Of
waiting
course.
to get
Yeah,
from them too.
that makes perfect sense. Then I will announce that the next regular meeting of the Board of Directors will take place on November 14th, 2023 at 6 p.m. on Zoom and at the Community Room, 970 Embarcadero Del Mar, Isla Vista, California. And this meeting is now adjourned.